should probably discuss the ground rules. I am one of those people who feels I'm failing miserably if I don't get any interaction and feedback. So please ask questions and contribute, participate, so we get going. As Dr. Fairfield said, this is a big idea talk, so this is not necessarily my original research, but rather presenting to you some of the issues and concerns that are going to dominate your careers. So thinking about Social Security, charity begins at 65, an update on the Social Security and Medicare program. So first of all, just some understanding of term Social Security. It comes in two flavors. There's old age and survivors insurance, which pays a retirement check to individuals over age 65 in the United States. And there's disability insurance, which pays disability benefits to those who can no longer work. And then there's Medicare, which also has many moving parts. There's the hospital insurance part, which pays for inpatient hospital and related care. Then there's the supplementary medical insurance, which pays for your physicians, your doctor's visits. And then there's Part D, which is the prescription drug plan. It only started in 2006. The benefits under Medicare are provided to most people age 65 and over, and to most people on Social Security disability. So the Social Security and Medicare systems are the two largest federal programs in the United States. In 2012, which is the most recently available fiscal year, they consumed 38% of all federal government expenditures. So if these two are out of control, and I'll give you a preview of upcoming events, they're out of control. If these two are out of control, then we've got serious trouble on our hands. In 2012, there were nearly 46 million people receiving OASI, or just what we'll just call Social Security benefits, almost 11 million receiving disability benefits, and almost 51 million people were covered under Medicare. So we're talking a big chunk of the population. Yes, Dr. Day.
We also need to assess related tax revenues in order to conclude that we are out of control.
Yes, and we will go ahead and do that.
Thank you.
Okay, so financing of Social Security and Medicare, we look at the question of where does the money come from? Social Security and disability are largely funded out of payroll taxes. That's that line FICA tax on your paycheck. That takes out of payroll. It's a function of your salary. The health insurance program is also heavily funded through payroll taxes. But there's also a big chunk that's coming out of general fund revenue. General fund revenue are just allocated revenues of the federal government. That's going to be income tax revenue, federal government revenue from corporate income taxes, from tariffs, from all the general sources of federal income and revenue. There are some small amount of premiums coming out, which is paid in by the beneficiaries of the supplemental medical insurance. That's the only source of revenue over there. If you look at it, what you'll see is that those premiums represent substantially less, rather than a third, of the outlays on the SMI. So basically what you're seeing is that that one is also heavily funded by general fund revenues. So what was the motivation behind Social Security and Medicare? And one of the things was that Social Security and Medicare, although they have been generally advertised as programs for a pension or a retirement system, where people pay in over the course of their lifetimes and then collect over the course of their retirement, Social Security and Medicare are in fact also largely developed as programs for redistribution. They are designed to shift resources from the current working to the currently retired. This is a pay-as-you-go kind of program where the money that goes in and the money that comes out are largely offsetting. You have the decline in the fraction of the population over 65 living in poverty. Since the life of the Social Security program began, it's been largely successful at reducing the fraction of the elderly living in poverty. And since about 1982, actually the share of the elderly living in poverty has been lower than the share of the total population living in poverty. The group that is much more likely to be living in poverty at this time are the young, those under age 18, relative to those over age 65. This is an illustration of Social Security retirement ages and life expectancy since the start of the program in the early 1930s. what you can see is that at the time the program was first implemented, life expectancy was relatively low compared to the retirement age built into the program. Most people didn't expect to live long enough to collect. But that recently, the life expectancy has been growing, of course, very rapidly, whereas the age for retirement only started growing with some very small incremental amounts in the latter part of the 2010s. So we had a creeping upward of the retirement age there at the end, but still the number of years that a person might expect to live after the normal retirement age has been increasing substantially over time. The Social Security taxes for 2014, or the tax rate that we expect to be paying for 2014, the employer and the employee are statutorily assigned half of the FICA taxes, half the tax for Social Security, half the tax for Medicare. Now we all know that Congress can't legislate the incidence of the tax, that this thing largely falls back to workers in general. And that's kind of reflected in the tax rate that individuals who are self-employed would have to pay. So the Social Security system basically consumes about 15% of payroll each year in terms of these taxes paid by individuals and the taxes paid by employers on their behalf, which result in lower take-home pay for these individuals. In 2014, the first $117,000 in wages will be subject to Social Security. Any wages you earn above that threshold, you don't pay Social Security tax on. Okay? But all wages are subject to the Medicare tax. And furthermore, if you have wages above $200,000 as an individual or $250,000 as a couple, then you also have to pay a Medicare surcharge. So a high income surcharge goes straight to Medicare. It's 0.9% of income. So that this is a new thing just being implemented in 2013. So here's an illustration of what's been going on with Social Security tax rates over the last few years. What you'll observe is this kind of notch over there in the Social Security tax rate. That notch represents a program of the Obama administration to stimulate economic activity in the face of the Great Recession. So there was a period of time where there were cuts in the payroll tax rate, and any shortfalls in revenue were made up by general revenue of the federal government or the issuance of debt. And so what you had was a temporary short. Those went back up to their normal payroll tax standards in January of 2013. So we're back at those tax rates for 13 and 14 being the same. Okay. So you pay your taxes. You pay taxes on your payroll. How do you get Social Security benefits under the program? First of all, you have to contribute for at least 40 quarters or 10 years. So you have to have been a paying payroll FICA for at least 40 quarters. The benefits you receive are going to be based on your average indexed monthly earnings, which is to take your monthly earnings to index them for wage growth on average nationwide over the lifetime. And they're going to take your best 35 years of earnings to calculate your average indexed monthly earnings. And then they're going to inflation index that to the values at your age 60. So when you're 60, they're going to stop inflation indexing the average indexed monthly earnings. So it's going to take your best 35 years, but you only have to contribute for 10 in order to be eligible for the same benefits as somebody who had contributed for 35 or 45 years. Okay, so there is built in here, therefore, a differential. It's not a function of how many years you paid in. So it's not necessarily a function of how much you have contributed to Social Security. Your eligibility for benefits depends on having been in there for at least 10 years and looking at your highest earning 35 years where they're adjusting for inflation, the wage inflation. Okay. For an individual who first becomes eligible for Social Security benefits next year, your primary insurance amount will be the sum of, you get 90% of the first $816 a month in average earnings you get back. So you have a match rate of 90% of your earnings. 32% of your average index monthly earnings over $816 and less than $4,917. Then 15% of everything above that up to the maximum individual benefit, $2,642 a month, which is not cushy, okay? So don't plan on retiring on Social Security even if it's still around to pay you. $26.42 a month is not the world's greatest lifestyle, okay? This is the Social Security replacement rates, looking at what your average annual earnings would be and what fraction of your average annual earnings you would receive back in Social Security benefits. And what I really want you to see is this sharply downward declining relationship here. The match rate is much, much higher for low-income households than it is for higher-income households. And income households above the 117 would no longer be paying in. They could not get any more than the max benefit. So for them, that's essentially the threshold we want to care about. The match rate for very low-income workers is better than 80%. The match rate for higher income workers is more like 28%. So this is substantially progressive benefit system, which redistributes substantially, not only from the current young to the current old, but also from higher income households to lower income households. That is why Social Security is our biggest program for redistribution under federal law. So working in Social Security benefits. If you work while you're collecting Social Security benefits, you are going to get slapped upside the head. Okay? Basically, they're going to say if you start receiving benefits before your full retirement age, every $1 of benefits is deducted for every $2 in earnings that you have. So you're essentially paying a 50% tax on your benefits. Okay? If you earn anything more than $15,480. So there is a substantial cap on the amount of salary. If you are collecting benefits before your regular retirement age, if you take what's called early retirement, then you're going to have to pay back if you earn any salary at a rate that is just punitive. And therefore, it's very unlikely that individuals will take early retirement and then continue to work. Okay? However, if you reach your full retirement age, which has been creeping up and is now 67 years, if you reach your full retirement age and continue to work, you can collect Social Security benefits and continue to get paid, and you don't reduce your benefits no matter how much you earn. Okay, so there's no penalty for working if you don't retire until you reach your full retirement age. But if you take early retirement, then you continue to work, then you are essentially taking $1 off the table for every $2 that you earn. How do the benefits work? One of the really interesting pieces of the way the Social Security system works is the spousal benefits. Married individuals can receive benefits calculated one of two ways. Either they're going to take your lifetime earnings and calculate the Social Security benefit to which you are entitled based on your work history with Social Security. And then they're going to take your spouse's lifetime earnings and calculate the spouse's the benefits based on their contributions in life history. And then anyone who's married has the option. You can either get a full check based on your personal history or half a check based on your spouse's. So if you're a worker and your husband's check is going to be substantially bigger than yours, then you could take half your husband's check or the check that your own lifetime working history could earn for you. And it's gender neutral. It works exactly the same way if the woman is the higher earner and the guy is the lower earner. This is particularly relevant if you're talking about a couple where one of them worked and one of them did not. Because if one of them worked and they paid into the Social Security system, the one that didn't work is still entitled to half a check. So the couple gets a check and a half for one person's contribution to the Social Security system. Whereas if you had had two earners both paying in, you can get his check for his earnings, her check for her earnings, or one of them can get that half a check thing. But they will have both been paying in over their lifetime rather than only one of them paying in. Because of this particular treatment of spousal benefits, you have an enormous advantage built into the system for the single earner couple, because they pay taxes on one paycheck but collect a Social Security check and a half. Okay? Whereas if you have a two-earner couple, one of you has been paying in taxes all your working life for a very, very small marginal increase in your Social Security check. Okay? The benefits paid to your spouse will not decrease your retirement benefit. Okay? So just because you have a spouse that's receiving the benefits doesn't in any way reduce your retirement benefits. So that if you had two working individuals, one single man and one married man with a non-working spouse, okay, they can pay in over their lifetimes exactly identical amounts. The single man will get a check, the married man will get a check and a half. Okay? So the system is set up that way. Oh, but wait, there's more. In order to be eligible for the spousal benefit, for the half a check, you have to be married to the guy for 10 years, or the gal for 10 years. So if you're married to him if you're not married to him for 10 years, there's no eligibility for that check whatsoever. You have to be married to him for 10 years or married to them at the time of retirement in order to be eligible for the check. But if you were married to him for 10 years, okay, and then you divorce him, then it's still, for all legal purposes, equivalent to you're still married to him. Your benefits are still calculated as on your own earnings or half a check from your former spouse, no matter how many former spouses there are. Okay? So long as you've been married for 10 years, okay, your spouse is entitled to half a check. Okay? So imagining, and it's not very hard to imagine, you've got one high-earning male with a sequence of wives. Check for him, half a check for wife number one, half a check for wife number two, half a check for wife number three, and then the bimbo that married him right before 65, half a check for her too. Okay? So basically what you've got is a sequence of benefits for each of these individuals, so long as they continue to live. Now, if you're married to him, and you're married for 10 years, you divorce him, you marry some other guy. Okay? If you're married to somebody else at the time of retirement, then your claim is to the new hubby's retirement check, the half of his. But if you are married to him for a while, divorce him again, you're now single in the eyes of the Social Security system when you retire, and once again you can claim your first husband's Social Security check, even though you did remarry, so long as you are not remarried at the time of retirement. Okay? So there are lots of political games people can play about how to maximize the benefits coming through this system. And the one thing they're not very closely related to is how much you paid in over your lifetime. Dr. Dave.
How important is this? I mean, like, how many people are actually getting their ex-husbands benefits?
We don't know. What we know is the divorce rates are relatively substantial, and for the women over this age group, there is a substantial chunk that are divorced. So we don't have a really good estimate of what fraction that is.
Has anyone tested whether the 10-year threshold actually matters for?
No, it'd be a wonderful regression discontinuity to see whether it does or doesn't. I don't think it's well understood. I don't think there are a lot of people out there who realize that you have to hang on for another 6 months if you want to get that better retirement. But it would make for a very interesting analysis threshold to see whether it affects marriage.
Is there a reason
We don't really know.
that we don't have that information? Like, is it like you can't collect it, or just nobody has collected it? Like, how many divorcees are collecting checks, or how many people are?
I'm sure the IRS knows. I haven't seen anything. I don't know that they have actually gone into the databases to try and figure it out. Okay, but it's something that could easily be knowable. And just as I said, you don't want to be leading. You've got to remember the context in which a lot of these rules were made. A lot of these rules were first adopted during a period of time when women's work opportunities outside of the home were very limited, where there was a great fear of the starter wife getting cut off from a pension to which she had contributed by working in the home. She hadn't had access to it. She was going to be destitute in her old age. And so the system was set up to provide that safety net. Okay? And as a safety net, that's cool, but as a pension, that's not what we're looking at. What we're looking at here is, if you think of Social Security as a system that's designed to put a floor under the retirement earnings of little old ladies, then you don't see it, you wouldn't necessarily see anything wrong with this pattern whatsoever. But if you're going to think of it as something where you paid in and you're therefore entitled to take back out, then it ought to be more related to how much you paid in. That's a hand, Tina. And
Well, there's something to be said, or is no one taking into account the idea that there are externalities to having a person that's at home. If there are children, there's childcare that person is providing that no one has to pay for anymore. There's all sorts of things that are being taken care of. That person's not paying for those things, or no one has to pay for those things. But if they did have to pay for those things, then that person would have to work for them. There would be taxes on them. Those taxes would go into the system. That's the idea of having a person that has a second income or doesn't have to have the second income. That's sort of part of what somebody would think about as a half check coming. Or perhaps if I'm the first or second of 5 wives and I stuck it out for 10 years, maybe he's enough of a jerk that I deserve some sort of half check.
I in no way are arguing that he's not a jerk.
He sounds like, and at least he sounds like he's difficult to be married to.
It could very well be difficult to be married to. And but the question is, yes, clearly women who are stay-at-home wives are working. They're making enormous contributions in terms of household production. Their labor and effort is valued and important. What they're not doing is making Social Security contributions on the basis of that earnings, or that opportunity cost of earnings. Okay, so essentially what we're doing is subsidizing the stay-home spouse through the structure of the Social Security system. And we don't really have a good political conversation about to the extent to which we want to subsidize that stay-home spouse. Dr. Griffin, you had your hand up.
Given the current popularity of just being shacked up, how do they go about determining whether 10 years, what period, when did it start, and do you have to formally be married?
My understanding is you do have to legally, formally be married, and this has gotten really interesting lately because of same-sex marriages being legal in some states. The IRS, the Social Security Administration has not yet gone through a test case, but they are encouraging same-sex couples to apply in those states where, those who are legally married. Because it's not eligible just for living together unless you reach the thresholds of common law spouse. But the same-sex couples who are legally married appear to be eligible for Social Security benefits, but it's not been tested in the courts yet. So that I don't believe that any benefits have yet been paid. But individuals have been told, based on the most recent Supreme Court decision, to go ahead and apply.
So what constitutes a common law marriage then?
I think it varies from state to state. And you have to live together for a certain period of time, and you have to profess that you are married. And that's the hard part. Yeah.
Quick clarifying question. So the male with the
5, she said.
3 or 5 ex-wives who are also drawing 50% of his check. Now, do that mean that that money comes out of his check, or
no, nothing out of his check.
Okay.
Out of the taxpayer's check. Okay. So it's one individual can leverage a certain amount paid in. So let's break all ideas that this is in any way really all that much a pension. This is a program for redistribution to put a safety net underneath the elderly. And the elderly are not necessarily our poorest group, but that's partially because of Social Security. Social Security is the reason why it's counted as part of their money income when calculating the poverty rates in the United States. Yes?
What kind of a gap is there? Have you looked at any of those statistics of, okay, so yes, we have much lower poverty rates for the 65, but if that that was a question when you put that graph up earlier. So if that includes their Social Security check, what does that gap look like then? If you take out the Social Security check, how much higher is that over 65 poverty level? The number that are in poverty, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and it clearly would be higher. We don't really know how much higher it would be. They don't have I have not seen any attempts to take those numbers out of Social Security, out of the poverty rate, take the Social Security checks out of the calculated poverty rate. I do know that the poverty rate for young people is better than 20%. So there's a lot of room for the poverty rate for the elderly to come up and still be below the poverty rate for the very young. Anybody else? Okay. So, given the structure of the Social Security system, the greatest beneficiaries of Social Security are low-income households. Their match rate is substantially better in terms of the earnings that they pay in compared to the checks that they receive upon retirement are substantially better. Single women and married women who don't work outside the home tend to be the greatest beneficiaries of Social Security. Women tend to be the greater beneficiaries of Social Security, not so much because we tend to earn less than guys, although we do, and that puts us into the low-wage worker categories, but because we tend to live longer than guys, and therefore collect more Social Security checks at the back end. So even if we had pure paycheck parity with the guys, we would still take more away from Social Security as single women and married women who don't work outside the home because of being able to collect those checks for a longer period of time. Married couples make out very well, particularly compared to single individuals. Single earner couples come out ahead of double earner couples. And individuals with a generally longer life expectancy, namely Anglos, tend to come out ahead relative to individuals with relatively shorter life expectancy, which would be many of the minority groups in the United States. So you pay in for the same basic period of time, but your life expectancy is 72. Somebody else's life expectancy is 82. They're going to be able to take a lot more back out of the system compared to what they pay in than somebody who works until retirement age and dies comparatively young. So the system does play favorites. Okay. So the Urban Institute calculated the lifetime payments that individuals would put into the system and compared it to the lifetime benefits that those individuals would take out of the system. Okay. Assuming individuals started working at age 22 and continued to work until age 65, so these are full lifetime workers, just at various income thresholds. And this is going to be the ratio of the benefits received divided by the contributions. These are going to be present discounted value of benefits received compared to present discounted value of contributions made at age 65. So at retirement age, present discounted value of your expected benefits with the your life expectancy and present discounted value of contributions using a real interest rate of about 2%. Which is a reasonable real interest rate, an inflation-adjusted interest rate over the period under analysis. What you will observe is somebody who retired in 1960 was taking back about 7 times or better what they had ever paid in to the system. This is my grandmother, okay? My family was enormously benefited because grandmother had a Social Security check, so we were not in a position of needing to support her with her assets and our earnings, okay? So, but the people who retired in age 60, they just didn't pay in all that much compared to what they were able to take out. People who retired in 1980 still took out about double what they put in terms of present discounted value of what they contributed compared to present discounted value of what they took out. Somebody who retired in 2010, all of those bars are above the threshold, meaning that all of those groups get back more than they paid in. Okay, and because of the scale, you can't really see that it's still like 20–25% more than you paid in. But those who are starting to look at Social Security, Medicare, retirement in 2030 are still looking at a situation where the threshold benefit is greater than what you paid in. If you look at Social Security only, yep.
Quick question. How are you treating the employer's contribution? Are we assuming that the incidence of the tax really falls on the individual?
This is not my work, this is Urban Institute research. My understanding is that they did it right, but I wouldn't swear to it. I mean, in order to do it right, you have to have counted the employer's contributions on their behalf. And
assuming that
that is my understanding of how they did it, yes.
And the incidence of the tax is on the individual.
Right. That would be my understanding of how they did it.
I would question that.
I will get back to you on that, but I'm 99% sure that's how they did it.
Okay.
Okay. Here's Social Security only. So the first is Social Security and Medicare. This is Social Security only. What you observe if you don't count the fact that people's Medicare benefits relative to their Medicare contributions are much more generous. Medicare is a later program, introduced later, so people didn't contribute to it in nearly as many years. And healthcare costs have been rising rapidly. What you get is that for Social Security only, the benefit ratios are less than 100%, meaning you paid in more than you take back out for Social Security only. For all of the groups except for a single earner couple, or a couple where one of them has an average or better salary and the other one is a low wage earner, so that person would trade off, instead of getting their own check, would get a half a check of their spouses. So high wage earner married up to a low wage earner or a zero wage earner still makes out ahead. But all the other groups' contributions are such that the present discounted value of what they pay in is less than the present discounted value of what they take back. Now, if you think of Social Security as a form of social insurance, where essentially the system exists in order to put a safety net under the poor, in order to make sure that the poor do not go hungry in their old age, then you would think that insurance has a price, the same as all other kinds of insurance have a price, and you shouldn't expect that everyone would take back out of the system on average what they paid in to the system. That there ought to be some differential. You'll observe that it's getting bigger for those who retire in 2030. Only the single earner couple would be in a situation where the present discounted value of what they pay in exceeds the present discounted value of what they take out. Okay? So this are kind of a blow up of that final period of time, looking at Social Security only, and folks with Social Security and Medicare. What Urban Institute estimates is that for folks retiring in 2030, when you include Medicare, you're still in a situation where the individuals are being able to take out as much or more than they're putting in. So, why does that matter? It matters because we are at a situation where the number of retired persons per worker is not particularly, is high. Retired persons per worker is high and tending to rise. As we live longer, and we all want to live longer, the Social Security system is becoming greater and greater financial stress. This is the old age insurance and disability income rate. That's in red. That's the money coming in to the federal government. The green is the money going out from the federal government. The difference between the two is the money that's going to have to come from general revenue of the federal government over the life of the program. And the difference between the two is expected to continue to rise basically until the baby boom has completely retired, and then it's going to stabilize. The difference between those two is expected to stabilize as you get into the out years. This is the hospital insurance trust funds, revenues and expenses. Yes?
So, I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this, but I think, so there's been a trend towards people working longer and longer. So it used to be that people just retired immediately when they qualified for Social Security. Obviously these projections are assuming something about people's decisions to work.
Right.
Could you give us some insight into it.
The projections are generated by the Social Security trustees, which are an independent audit group in some sense of researchers who are knowledgeable in Social Security issues. Tom Saving up on the third floor in the economics program was a Social Security trustee for a number of years. So these are essentially economist projections. When you read the documentation, it looks like the projections are based on reasonable assumptions about the age at which people choose to retire, and that not assuming all of them will retire at 65, but using a distribution of retirement age. I should also point out that these are what are called the intermediate forecast estimates. There are also estimates that are much less favorable to the Social Security system, in the sense of assuming that you had longer periods of unemployment, or that people would retire younger and generate the kind of the high cost estimates. And you also have relatively low cost estimates. They're economic estimates, which means we know one thing we know about them is that they are point estimate wrong. Okay? We're not going to get exactly what these numbers represent, but they are a respectable ballpark estimate of what's going on. So my understanding is that the trustees' report includes assumptions about retirement age that do not assume everybody's going to retire at 65. It's also probably worth noting that the hospital insurance income rate is calculated assuming that the federal law as it existed at the time of the calculations was going to be enforced, which was the law that said that the reimbursement rates for hospitals and physicians were going to be held down. Okay, and that there was some non-zero risk, that in fact they were going to relax those assumptions or postpone those assumptions and not try to reduce the payments to physicians and payments to hospitals at the same rates that the law implied. So there's some serious upside potential to the cost rate for the health insurance, for the hospital insurance. Yeah.
Another clarifying question: what happens to the carryover from year to year? I mean, are you assuming? I mean, this model assumes that each year there's new revenues that are generated and new costs that are incurred, or the difference between the cost and the revenue that I don't know, I won't call it profit, whatever that's called. Is that model in here?
It's not compounding. These are new benefits and new costs each year.
Okay, so what's happening to the difference?
Well, the difference goes into that mythical lockbox called the Social Security Trust Fund, which is an accounting entity, or I understand it's actually physically a file drawer in Washington, D.C., into which are placed securities. The Social Security system, when its revenues exceed its expenditures, and until very recently its revenues were substantially exceeding its expenditures, those extra money would be parked in treasury bills. Would be essentially purchased treasury bills, and those would be said, this is the Social Security Trust Fund, is this box of treasury bills over here. And whenever the benefits that the Social Security system has to pay out exceed the costs that exceeds the revenue that come in, then they cash in the interest on those T-bills, and then subsequently they cash in the T-bills themselves. So we're currently in a world of living on the contributions and the accumulated interest on the trust funds. Okay? Where does the federal government get the money to pay off the interest on the trust funds? Well, that's the problem. It's got to come out of general revenue of the federal government. So whenever the Social Security system is drawing down its accumulated interest on the trust fund, that drawdown of accumulated interest has to come from general revenue of the federal government. There's no other source of revenue to cover that. So long before the trust fund is exhausted, the federal government is going to, the federal revenues, general fund revenues, are going to have to be paying off those accumulated treasury bills in the Social Security lockbox. These are key dates for the trust fund. for the old age security and disability. The first year that the outgo persistently exceeds income excluding interest, so not counting the interest, is just the FICA taxes compared to the payments going out. Okay. Starting in 2010 for Social Security, starting in 2005 for the hospital insurance program, we pay out more than we take in every year. Okay. And we make up the difference right now with the interest that the Social Security program has earned on its savings, on the accumulated trust fund. And so we get general revenue of the federal government to pay back that interest. Okay. The first year that the outgo exceeds the income, including interest, means the first year you have to start eating into the capital in the Social Security Trust Fund, is 2021 for the old age and retirement system. It's already happened for the health insurance system, so that we each year are reducing the capital in the trust fund for health insurance. The year the trust fund is expected to be exhausted is 2033 for old age and survivors, and 2026 for health insurance. That's the year in which there's no more interest payment to be used. They're going to have to start eating the lunch. They're going to have to start eating the capital in that account. But the thing that's really scary for people who are interested in public affairs is that long before the trust fund is expired, the federal government is going to have to come up with general revenue to pay the interest owed to the Social Security system and the Medicare system. And in the trustees report from 2005, which is the last time Tom Saving was directing this thing, so the last time they made this chart, they compared the expenses, or the gap between the revenue coming in and the expenditures going out for the Social Security system and the Medicare system. So the funding shortfalls as a percent of federal income taxes. So we're looking at here in 2020, which used to be the expected date at which this thing was going to exhaust, that Social Security and Medicare were consuming 29% of the federal income tax revenues, plus, of course, all of the payroll taxes that were going into that system. So in other words, at that point in time, the federal income taxes are dedicated to paying the Social Security obligations. There's nothing left for silly little things like defense and education and other welfare programs and the National Institutes for Health or any the National Science Foundation. None of that kind of thing. We're basically going to be chewing things up. 2041, 2/3 of the federal income tax revenue dedicated to paying existing obligations to Social Security. That's your lunch. That's taking all the fun out of being a federal bureaucrat over the next 25 years, because there's going to be no discretion whatsoever and no money left to spend if we don't get this issue under control. There are lots of strategies out there for bringing the Social Security system under control. And in fact, there are some kind of Sim City type games where you can do the exercise of trying to figure out what it would take to bring Social Security back into balance so that the payroll coming in would offset the benefits going out. One of the things that would be particularly powerful at doing this is to increase the number of workers per retiree. That would be the first best way of restoring health to the Social Security and Medicare system. You increase the number of workers per retiree by pushing the unemployment rate down from where it currently sits at close to 8% down to where it was a decade ago, which is more like 5%. By increasing immigration of young workers to add to the labor supply. By encouraging older workers to postpone retirement for longer periods of time. And that could be done through kind of moral suasion kinds of things. It can be done by increasing the retirement age. You don't want to stick it to people that are where retirement is within their short-run planning horizon. But we've got to start thinking about raising the retirement age for individuals, because we're living a long time at retirement age now, which wasn't the case when this program was first set up. So Social Security and Medicare is eating our lunch. So let's go eat ours. So, thank you all.